If after listening to these reasons, you still think it's a great idea to lead a secular life, there has to be a reason. It can't be that you have rationally concluded that. There must be some emotional anger or hostility to religion, or that you've been successfully brainwashed into believing that you are above religion. You don't need it. You do. And society certainly does. The data are overwhelming.
Hey you. Yeah, you. Welcome back to our master's program in debunking the snake oil proprietor, Dennis Prager. This is our final episode in our series, and it's a doozy. If you think Dennis has made some pretty weird claims so far, buckle up, because his smugness is about to hit 11, and it's cringe, because Dennis thinks that you have no friends.
Next consequence of secularism: the death of communal life. You may not have thought of that one.
Yeah, for good reason, Dennis.
But I have a very simple way of illustrating this. What secular groups get together on a weekly basis?
Seriously, Dennis. You can't be this deluded.
Name me one. I'll give you a moment to think about it. Because religious people do. I get together with my community every Sabbath.
Well, you've got to hand it to Dennis. That is an impressively ignorant question to ask, and especially with such self-satisfaction. Now, here's an idea. Let's ask supporters of the channel, can our patrons overcome Dennis's mighty hurdle? Here's just a few of the answers that they gave. Daniel is a master gardener and a member of several gardening associations in Oklahoma. Echoes and Mark meet weekly to perform music. Ted disc golfs twice a week. What the hell is disc golf? Oh, I'm so in. Then we've got Paul meeting up every Sunday with like-minded sci-fi apes and also having dinner once a week with his family. Michael cycles with a triathlon group on Saturdays. Glace goes to HEMA twice a week, as does my editor and Reese. Loads of people mention D&D, which, I'm not going to lie, inspires me to start a Patreon campaign. Roll initiative. And as for me, damn, where do I start? Eating babies, that's a really fun meetup. Sodomy, not together, of course. The former's on Thursdays and the latter's on Fridays. Then there's abortion party Wednesdays, and yes, that's where we get the food for Thursdays. Oh, and how could I forget? Champagne and caviar with the Marxists on Tuesdays. We are, I assure you, very much down with the proletariat. So yeah, basic atheist things, really. Sinning. Alright, on a serious note, I once a week play D&D, sometimes twice a week, even. Most weeks I have a movie night with friends. We're currently going through the Harry Potter series again, arguing about whether Snape has a redeemable arc.
It's Leviosa.
I meet with my gym bros several times a week, and what will especially trigger Dennis is that some of my bros are female. Oh, how words change. I play tabletop games almost weekly. I frequently play many different video games while chatting with my friends, such as Rocket League and World of Warcraft. Oh, and of course, I go to church once a week to juggle balls, as in table tennis. I play twice a week, even, with the other venue being a secular community centre. And talking of secular community centres, Dennis and his team merely needed to visit just one community centre to thoroughly debunk their claim. People meet up weekly for countless reasons, some of which mentioned by our patrons. Other such weekly meetups include chess clubs, gaming organisations, any of 1 billion sports-related exercise clubs, book clubs, cooking, music clubs, baby groups, dance clubs, martial arts associations, art and craft meetups, and so on. Or to leave the community centre, what about, pubs? People frequently meet in pubs to watch live music, watch sports, etc. Oh, and then there's scouts, girl guiding, hiking, flying clubs, car meetups, etc. Honestly, this claim from Dennis is breathtakingly disconnected from reality.
Give me a secular equivalent of a weekly meeting with people. 52 times a year.
Ah, damn it. I only played D&D 51 times last year, so it just doesn't count. Good game, Dennis. Thanks, secularism.
I cannot think of one.
Surely, even if you like Dennis and find much of what he has to say intriguing, you can admit that this smug claim from him is utterly absurd, no? As is obvious to anyone who even remotely thinks about the question, there's way more secular communities than religious communities. I mean, put it this way, all religious congregations are communities, but not all communities are religious congregations. So, in just 15 seconds, Dennis said something so farcical that I don't know why anyone takes him seriously. But people do take him seriously, so let's, for the final time, dive in. The issue of bias reporting is something that I've spoken about a lot, and as you're going to see from Dennis within this very video, it only takes a few twists to turn a solid fact, or even a study, into a narrative that, ironically, contradicts the facts.
Not an attack, it's just a fact.
And of course, this is true of all media sources, including those that you and I trust the most. That's why I've been using Ground News for the last few weeks, and I'm now very excited to recommend them to you too. Ground News is a website and app that compares news across the political spectrum, effortlessly providing transparency of factual reliability and bias. Let's say, hypothetically, that a religious leader asked a boy to suck his tongue. No, it's not a Catholic priest, not this time at least. It's the Dalai Lama. No, editor, the human holy one. As we can see, Ground News provides a summary of the story up top, and lets us know that it's been covered by 350 sources. We can also see that the left, right and centre are reporting this incident, but that there's a slight bias to the left, which is not all that surprising, to be honest. If we scroll down, we can see who's publishing content on this topic, how much of the coverage is coming from independent news, governments, media conglomerates and so on, as well as what percentage of them are accurately reporting the facts. Ground News provides this level of insight into every topic that's hitting the news, be it Rishi Sunak saying that anti-maths mindset needs to change so the UK economy can grow, or Montana being close to becoming the first state to completely ban TikTok. Damn, so much for the land of the free, huh? I found Ground News to be really useful because I, like everyone else, am in an echo chamber. Wait, what? Editor, I thought you could only do this in post. What even is happening? As someone who wants to converse with people from different walks of life, I need to be able to speak their language, and to speak their language, I need to know their narrative. Ground News has proven to be a very useful tool in this regard, and for a very reasonable price. If you too would like to be better informed, then please click my link below. Thank you to Ground News for sponsoring this episode.
Every single poll, all secular organizations, Gallup, Pew Research, universities, it's as close to unanimous as polling can get. Actively religious people are happier than secular people. So of course the secular have an answer. Well, they have this crutch called God, and that makes them happier. I love when God is called a crutch. Let's say a person has a skiing accident, breaks his ankle, breaks her ankle, needs a crutch. So it's obvious the person needs a crutch because they have a broken ankle. What if we have a broken temperament, a broken conscience? Maybe we need the so-called crutch called God.
Finally! Thank the gods! We've got tangible clay to work with. Dennis even gave us his sources, and they're a great place to start.
Every single poll, all secular organizations, Gallup, Pew Research, universities, it's as close to unanimous as polling can get. Actively religious people are happier than secular people.
Right, so first of all, Dennis gives us 5 sources. The first references a Gallup poll, and the other 4 reference the same Pew Research meta-study. So despite saying every single poll, he means one poll and one meta-study. A meta-study that doesn't, believe it or not, include every single poll.
It's as close to unanimous as polling can get.
But is it as close to unanimous as polling gets? Really? Let's take a look. The Gallup poll was conducted over 10 years ago on a random sample of 676,080 adults living in all 50 US states and the District of Columbia. To put that into perspective, they polled 0.2% of the US population. So drawing any sweeping conclusions from this poll would be pretty silly, wouldn't it? They themselves, in fact, state this. This study does not allow for a precise determination of why this might be the case. Now, if we take the screenshot Dennis showed his audience and scroll down just a tad, we can see the numbers. Interestingly, it's immediately obvious that the moderately religious score is lower in self-reported happiness than is the non-religious score. So I can see why Dennis didn't want to show the actual data. Doing so would reveal complexities that his simple narrative would prefer don't exist. Namely, that God isn't the crutch, is he? If God was the crutch, then the moderately religious would report higher happiness, wouldn't they? It's obviously the active part, which is to say, participation in community. Who'd have guessed it? Social species require a society. It's like the Bible, right? Don't get your flock to read the Bible for themselves. No. Read it for them. That way, they won't question your overwhelming data.
The data are overwhelming.
Another interesting observation that's immediately evident when we actually see the statistics is that we're talking about a difference of 3.9%. Now, don't get me wrong, that is a sizable number, but it's not quite the story that Dennis is spinning, is it? It's not like religious communities are all smiling, singing Kumbaya, while secular communities are miserable. But okay, sure. In the US, a poll of 0.2% of the population in the early 2010s found that the actively religious self-report greater happiness than the non-religious, and the non-religious reported greater happiness than the moderately religious. Dennis doesn't delve into why this is the case at all. He simply condescendingly boasts that the actively religious are happier than the non-religious, and then assures us that we need religion.
You do.
The source he references, however, isn't cringe. After making clear that the study does not allow for a precise determination of why this might be the case, they give us a few hypotheses, including that religious service attendance promotes social interaction and friendship with others, noting that the other studies in their series have clearly shown that time spent socially and social networks themselves are positively associated with high well-being. They also note that religion provides mechanisms for coping with setbacks and life's problems, which in turn may reduce stress, worry, and anger, which, of course, gets at the whole crutch thing that Dennis was on about.
I love when God is called a crutch.
And to give just one more example, they note that various religions have negative norms against such behaviours as smoking and alcohol consumption. Basically, they express that explanations are varied and complicated. To add a further factor that I'd speculate has an impact, maybe even quite a significant impact, while non-religious people don't feel culturally pressured to report being happier than they actually are, religious people do. They are living the faith, are they not? They are responsible for depicting the faith as to be advertising to others. Psalms 114:15 even explicitly states, "Happy are the people whose God is the Lord." But in any case, the difference between the two groups Dennis focuses on is just 3.9%. And their sample sizes are not consistent, with the largest demographic being the least represented. Before moving on to the Pew poll, here's another interesting fact that Dennis didn't report. The same Gallup poll reveals that while very religious Americans enjoy modestly higher scores across most of the well-being areas, the one exception is the physical health subindex, which is slightly higher for non-religious Americans than for very religious Americans. Hence, if you let Jesus take the wheel, then you'll go to heaven quicker. Yep, the zealous are speedrunning life, scoring especially high in obesity. You see the problem with such sweeping statements, right? It's almost as if we should take the source's advice and not jump to bold conclusions. It's almost as if only showing elements that benefit our constrained one-dimensional narrative is problematic, huh? Alright, what about Pew Research? Is it all the same? Yeah, pretty much. Pew's data comes from multiple sources, and they clearly state that the analysis finds comparatively little evidence that religious affiliation by itself is associated with greater likelihood of personal happiness or civic involvement. Well, shit. We've got ourselves another Trojan source, haven't we? Dennis's own sources undermine his claims. I guess they're just part of the establishment trying to hold Dennis down, huh? And so, to convince your flock, to protect them even, you're justified in editing out the inconvenient reality. Oh look, they even point out that the differences seen in the US isn't observed in all countries. So when Dennis says,
every single poll,
he's become so happy with the title that he neglected to read further. Not the wisest course of action, huh? And in addition to the various hypotheses that Gallup proposed for the differences in self-reported happiness in those countries that had one, Pew gave a few more. For instance, they note that religions often frown upon certain unhealthy behaviours, and that tendency seems reflected in data on smoking and drinking. Makes sense, right? If you believe that an all-powerful, all-knowing being is going to eternally forsake you if you take a shot of rum, then you'll stick with the holy water, won't you? Continuing, here's a good line from Dennis's Trojan source. While the data presented in this report indicate that there are links between religious activity and certain measures of well-being in many countries, the numbers do not prove that going to religious services is directly responsible for improving people's lives. Rather, it could be that certain kinds of people tend to be active in multiple types of activities, secular as well as religious. And to bolster this, they note that, in the US, 58% of actively religious adults say they are active in at least one other non-religious kind of voluntary organisation, whereas only 39% of unaffiliated people do the same. Further expanding upon this, they reference a study that found that religious participation had a strong impact on happiness among highly religious people with many friends in their congregation, but not among those with few friends in their congregation. Again, this strongly suggests it isn't participation itself, but rather strong social ties. Lastly, well, not really, they go on for pages, but lastly, for our purposes at least, Pew notes that compared with their less religious counterparts, the actively religious tend to be older, slightly less educated, and more likely to be female and married. Such differences raise the question, are people happier, more civically engaged, and less likely to smoke and drink because of their religious activity, or because of their other demographic traits? If we had a degree from Prager University, we'd take the fact that the actively religious are less educated and conclude that religion is for dumb people. Even sarcastically emulating Dennis feels icky. So, moving on. The friendship networks fostered by religious communities create an asset that Putnam and other scholars call social capital, which not only makes people happier by giving them a sense of purpose and belonging, but also makes it easier for them to find jobs and build wealth. In other words, those who frequently attend a house of worship may have more people they can rely on for information and help during both good and bad times. Indeed, a range of social scientific research corroborates the idea that social support is pivotal to the other aspects of well-being. Thus, while Dennis has failed to present us with overwhelming data,
the data are overwhelming.
What he's done instead is provide more than a decade-old poll of 0.2% of the US population and a meta-study that shows that, in the US, the actively religious self-report higher levels of happiness than the non-religious. Using such limited sources hardly counts as overwhelming. What's more, the polls show that the difference between each group is not, as Dennis claims,
close to unanimous as polling can get.
We're talking differences around the 4% mark, and both of his sources explicitly tell us not to make the inferences that Dennis invites us to make, and they provide plenty of explanations that do not fit his narrative. And that's why I'd speculate he doesn't show them to his audience. Dennis claims that the non-religious say that God is the crutch, but his Trojan sources make it pretty clear, with evidence no less, that it's belonging to a community that's the crutch. If anything is overwhelming, let's be honest, it's Dennis's shit-eating grin. Alright, let's look outside of Dennis's pair of Trojan sources, shall we? Professor Luke Galen informs us in his lengthy paper titled Focusing on the Non-Religious Reveals Secular Mechanisms Underlying Wellbeing and Prosociality that religiously involved individuals display, on average, greater well-being than secular people in regions where religiosity is the norm, whereas the opposite is true where secularity is the norm. This also applies to most circumscribed contexts such as within families. Adolescents' mental health is contingent upon whether they share the religious views of their parents, not whether those youths are themselves religious or non-religious. Thus, well-being is attributable to contextual matching, rather than the presence or absence of religiosity itself. Perhaps, then, in the US, in the 2010s, when religiosity was significantly higher than it is now, one of the reasons the actively religious reported higher happiness is attributable to contextual matching, no? Or to restate the point through Professor Vasily Saroglou, and more specifically his book The Psychology of Religion. In societies where religion is normative, being religious, which most often results from family socialization, is welcome and valued and helps people integrate well into the broader community. They swim along the stream. But in countries where secularism is normative, or religion is no more normative than secularism, being religious is not valued, is not part of broad socialization, and does not particularly help people integrate into the global society. Religious people swim against the stream. I mean, it makes sense, right? Being part of the dominant group in a society brings with it many psychological advantages, such as higher levels of social recognition and respect, which in turn can positively affect one's well-being. On the other hand, being an outsider of the dominant group often comes with negative factors, including discrimination and social stigma. You know, like what the Daily Wire and Dennis Prager do all the time and relentlessly to non-religious people.
There must be some emotional anger.
And this obviously doesn't just apply to religion. We humans apply this tribalism to any and all categories we can. It's part of our lowly stamp of origin. It's the source of our racism, sexism, etc. Dennis's inference from the fact that the actively religious self-report higher levels of happiness to the conclusion that it's specifically the religion that is the cause of this happiness is as ill-informed and dangerous as saying the reason there's higher portions of black people in prison in the US is because of genetics, while never once considering social, economic, and historical context. No, the headline confirms your bigotry, the liberals just can't handle the truth, move on. Or to play this dumb game with Dennis's sources, it would be like inferring from the fact that the non-religious are physically fitter than the religious that it's specifically religion that makes you fat. With Dennis, there's no consideration of, say, community holidays, general customs, laws, especially those that enable discrimination, or societal expectations. For example, in Islamic countries, people are expected to rise early to pray. If one doesn't rise early, then there's a decent chance people will consider one lazy or even callous. They might think, we have the discipline to get up early, but these non-Muslims don't. You know, this reminds me of my all-time favourite advert. And yes, I have a favourite advert. I studied advertising in an evil secular university, and now I drink Bud Light to trigger the snowflakes.
The English believe it's a slur on your host's food if you don't clear your plate. Whereas the Chinese feel you're questioning their generosity if you do. At HSBC, we never underestimate the importance of local knowledge. Which is why we have local banks, staffed by local people, in more countries than anyone else.
This advert comically illustrates how easily one might appear rude while having the intention of being respectful when one is an outsider. At the time the advert was made, the English typically considered clearing a plate to be an expression of gratitude. It's akin to saying, "Thanks, I ate all of it because I really enjoyed it." Whereas the Chinese considered clearing a plate to be an expression of bad hosting. It's akin to saying, "You didn't give me enough food to satisfy me." The point is that even a small deviation from a cultural norm is going to affect how the dominant group will view and treat you, and to be religious, and especially Christian, is the cultural norm in the US. This is changing very, very fast, but for now at least, it's still the case. And if the dominant group is quick to malign you, then you're more likely to report lower levels of happiness, aren't you?
That's right. We need a religion, we need a religious community, we need the meaning, we need all of these things to be happy. And religion gives them all, and secularism gives none of them. That's a big problem. Big problem.
Rephrase that for me, Dennis. Rephrase that.
We need a religion, and religion gives them all. We need a religious community, and religion gives them all, and secularism gives none of them. That's a big problem.
Yes, tautologies often are, Dennis. You should have learnt that before university. But I do agree, yes, Secularism doesn't give us religion, whereas religion does. Many insight, much impress. I trust at this point that it's obvious that Dennis hasn't met his burden of proof. Countless experts have made it abundantly clear that we don't need a religion nor a religious community to be happy. Most psychologists and sociologists agree that what we need is a community or social group of some sort. The key part isn't religious community, but a community, and its values, beliefs, and customs. It's whether you have people to dance with. Passing the floor to Dr. Azim Sharif.
In fact, analyses run by sociologists Robert Putnam and Chai-Yun Lim explicitly show that it is religious attendance, not prayer, not belief, but religious attendance, that explains why the religious tend to be happier than the non-religious in America. And what explains why it's religious attendance is the friendship networks and social support that people form in their congregations.
Before adding commentary, let's see Professor Luke Galen explore this further. There has been significant growth in the opportunity to encounter other secular and non-religious people, whether informally on the internet, as well as through formal organisations in schools, universities, and communities, reflecting a shift from individual non-belief to a collective identity. Although in most of these groups, the absence of religious belief itself is the ostensible common focus, they frequently also involve other socio-political issues and communal activities, such as dissemination of science and critical thought, promotion of church-state separation, volunteering for community service, and the like. As with other social organisations based upon shared worldviews, this communal activity serves to strengthen group cohesion as well as enhance self-understanding for the non-religious. Such social contact also has beneficial personal effects. As is the case with religious affiliation, being affiliated with a non-religious group is associated with greater well-being and pro-sociality relative to being unaffiliated. As someone who's been an atheist activist for quite a while, I am a member of many communities in this sense. I get to spend time with like-minded people with similar values and beliefs to my own, just like Dennis does. It's funny, huh? Dennis suggests that the secular have no friends, and yet when we do meet up, he calls us religious. There's no winning with this man, of that I'm sure.
So let me give you some data from the National Institutes of Health, National Library of Medicine. Data suggests that adherence to religious beliefs is associated with lower rates of suicide. Would you say that that's significant? A number of factors have been hypothesized to explain this association, including enhanced social support, less substance abuse, and lower rates of psychopathology. That's all. That's all religion gives you. Let's review that. Enhanced social support, less substance abuse, and lower rates of psychopathology. That's pretty powerful.
Do you want to know what's actually pretty powerful? Showing the title of one study, namely Religion and Suicide, New Findings, but when zooming in, showing an abstract from a completely different study. A study titled Religious Beliefs Buffer the Impact of Depression on Suicide Ideation. To make this clearer, here on the left you can see the study that Dennis reads the title of, and on the right you can see the abstract of a completely different study he zooms into.
That's all.
Except it's not all, is it, Dennis? Because you didn't just read a completely different abstract, but evidently added your own paragraph to it. Yeah. Here on the left is what the actual study's abstract states, whereas here on the right is the screenshot Dennis shows and reads out to his audience. You can even see above his added paragraph that it's the same abstract. It's even got the same font, same hex colours, and the same keywords. So did Dennis and his team add their own text to a study to bolster their case? Are they seriously that crooked? Well, if we check the Wayback Machine, we can see that the site hasn't changed since it was published, which is standard for studies. And if we Google the text that Dennis and the Daily Wire have added, we can see just one result comes up. But get this, it's from yet another study. A study titled Religiosity as a Protective Factor Against Suicidal Behaviour. A study whose conclusion reads, religiosity has a protective effect against suicide attempts, which is independent of social functioning, psychopathology, and substance use. But what Dennis did was take the objective and then paste it into another study to present it as if it's the conclusion, and to then paste both of these slices under the title of a third study.
Would you say that that's significant?
Yes, I would. In fact, I'd say that it's a damn disgrace. I cannot understate how unethical and immoral this is. The paper they steal the objective from even states, contrary to Dennis, that there were no differences in social functioning or rates of psychopathology among the study groups.
And lower rates of psychopathology.
So there you have it, folks. Dennis and the Daily Wire were so desperate to justify their bigotry that they've cherry-picked a title from one study, an abstract from another study, and digitally stitched in the objective from yet another study as to present it as a conclusion.
Well, that's all.
That is fucking absurd. Utterly breathtaking. Look, I can understand if you disagree with me, but if you endorse this level of manipulation, God help you, because your conscience sure as hell can't.
This is not a talk about how true religion is. It is about the consequences of the death of religion, and they are completely and totally nihilistic and destructive to the individual and to society. Greater rates of psychopathology, greater substance abuse, and more suicide. But who needs it?
We've already looked at the links between social support and happiness, and so you probably won't be that shocked to discover similar links with regards to substance abuse as well. To turn our attention again to Professor Galen, despite the centrality of spiritual concepts to the method, studies separating the effects of spiritual belief from secular features, such as group engagement and social support, find that the latter play the primary role in actual drinking reduction. Yeah, it's the same pattern again. It appears that as a social species, group engagement is beneficial, but it's not specifically religious group engagement. Now, what else does this play a role in?
Greater rates of psychopathology.
Yes, psychopathology. Well, once again, the research shows that in societies where religiosity is dominant, those involved with religion report fewer mental health issues. But in societies that are secular, either no relationship exists, or the non-religious are happier and have fewer mental health problems than the religious. That's right, the secular are happier and have fewer mental health problems in societies that are secular.
But who needs it?
Now, it feels like I'm repeating myself here, but you should be spotting a common theme, and it's not a particular benefit of religiosity. Alright, last one. Let's turn our attention to Dennis's claims pertaining to suicide.
A 2016 study published by JAMA Psychiatry, JAMA is the Journal of the American Medical Association, found that American women who attended a religious service at least once a week were 5 times less likely to commit suicide. This was a study of 90,000 women over 14 years. 5 times less likely to commit suicide. By the way, I wouldn't care if you decided to go to church or synagogue just because if somebody said, "Why are you going to church?" I said, "Because I'm 5 times less likely to commit suicide." It'd be fine with me. Or I'm much less likely to abuse drugs or alcohol. What's wrong? It's fine with me. I don't think you need a road to Damascus and you discover God and that's why you go to church. Go to church or synagogue, maybe then you'll discover God. Or study the Bible, which is my favorite way. Whatever it might be. The benefits are staggering. And the negative consequences are also staggering of the death of all of this.
Right, you know the drill by now. Let's compare Dennis's assertions to the study he claims to derive them from.
This was a study of 90,000 women.
Notice that Dennis says 90,000 women instead of 90,000 Catholics and Protestants. Yeah, if we carry out the smallest amount of due diligence, we can see that of the 90,000 women, less than a single % said they were of other religious heritage, which, of course, means that of this tiny fraction, we don't know at all how many of them were non-religious. So when Dennis advises us to go to church to find God,
Go to church or synagogue, maybe then you'll discover God.
he is either giving this advice to the non-religious based on no data on the non-religious, or he hasn't read the study he's bashing us with. Hence, in any case, Dennis is yet again withholding critical information from his mushrooms. He's feeding his audience shit, whether he realizes it or not. He prescribes the non-religious to attend religious services, but the study itself states the complete opposite. Our results do not imply that healthcare providers should prescribe attendance to religious services. However, for patients who are already religious, service attendance might be encouraged as a form of meaningful social participation.
If somebody said, why are you going to church? I said, because I'm 5 times less likely to commit suicide. It'd be fine with me.
The study doesn't say that though, does it, Dennis? But what to make of this study, huh? Let's begin by again seeing what the study itself advises. Although the nurses' health study was not targeted to a particular religious group, the study sample in fact consists mainly of Caucasian Christians and entirely of US female nurses. Our results might thus not be generalizable to the general US population, to men, to other races, to other countries, or areas with limited religious freedom. You know, I think Dennis might have taken the Trojan Source title from Matt Powell. It's frankly impressive how often the studies that he references refute the very claims he makes while wielding them. It's almost art. Another interesting highlight from the study, one that Dennis was careful not to reveal to his mushrooms, is that there were significant differences between the suicide rates of Catholics and Protestants, with the Protestant women being 7 times more likely to die by their own hand when compared to their Catholic sisters. Yes, 7 times more likely. So it seems that Dennis doesn't go far enough. He encourages people to attend a church or synagogue, but not a mosque, based on the erroneous statement that doing so will reduce one's suicide chance by 5-fold.
I'm 5 times less likely to commit suicide.
So to be consistent, Dennis, as a practicing Jew, ought to be selling to his audience specifically Catholicism. Again, it's almost art. Getting back to the study, the researchers also speculate on the reasons why religious attendance makes such a big difference in suicide rates among the religious. So again, not the non-religious. And they highlight factors that we've already discussed. You know, strong support networks and what have you. But they also consider the fact that suicide is deemed a sin in these religions.
You may not have thought of that one.
No, we did, Dennis. It's actually really quite obvious. Barely need to think about it, to be honest. In their own words, it is likely that service attendance is itself associated with the belief that suicide is wrong, and that this belief may be the primary pathway. This hypothesis has been proposed previously with some preliminary empirical evidence for it. Religious reasons sometimes given for prohibition against suicide include life being a gift from God, suicide being against the natural order, suicide causing injury to the community, suicide encouraging others to follow similar course, and death being this life's greatest evil. The most of the association in this analysis was not explained by depressive symptoms, alcohol consumption, or social integration, is consistent with moral beliefs being the dominant pathway.
Or I'm much less likely to abuse drugs or alcohol. What's wrong? It's fine with me.
It doesn't say that though, does it, Dennis? And you making out that it does isn't fine with me. In fact, it isn't fine with anyone who cares about the truth. So when Dennis asserts that you don't have to believe because you'll get the mentioned benefits simply by attending specifically a church or synagogue, but again not a mosque, he's wrong. You can get the general benefits through countless secular communities. And if you want the special suicide prevention, you need to actually believe in specifically Catholicism and attend a Catholic church on a weekly basis. You need to believe that a good God will come down upon you with great vengeance and furious anger in the next life, should you end this life by your own hand. Who'd have guessed it, huh? A religion that threatens to eternally torment you should you commit suicide happens to reduce the chances of you committing suicide, because it's better to be miserable in this life than to forego salvation in the next. The topic of religion and happiness is, as we have seen, a complex one, as the studies themselves more often than not state, drawing any sweeping generalizations from these studies is ill-advised, if only due to methodological considerations. If we are to draw anything, however, it's that social species need social environments. Whether you get your communal needs from a religious community, such as Christianity, Islam, or Hinduism, or from a secular community, such as D&D, sports clubs, or movie nights, the benefits are the same. We need community. To finish off not only this episode, but our entire series on Dennis's master's program, let's address the monologue we heard at the beginning.
If after listening to these reasons, you still think it's a great idea to lead a secular life, there has to be a reason. It can't be that you have rationally concluded that.
Except it can be that we've rationally concluded this. Despite earnestly reading more theological content than the vast majority of theists, including the arguments for God's existence, I simply do not believe in any religion, nor any God. You see, for Dennis, he has to define all non-believers, all of them, as irrational. And that's just pathetic. It's completely absurd. It's akin to claiming that all religious people are idiots. This type of rhetoric has no business being taken seriously.
There must be some emotional anger or hostility to religion.
No, there's not necessarily anger or hostility to religion. I don't believe in Judaism or Christianity, to pick Dennis's favourite religions, for intellectual reasons. I think that if there is a God who's omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent, it most certainly had no hand in the Bible. No good God would endorse, for instance, Numbers 31, 17 through 18.
Or that you've been successfully brainwashed into believing that you are above religion.
As we've demonstrated, with Dennis's own sources no less, it is him that's brainwashing people. He even stitched 3 different studies together, for crying out loud. He bet that his audience wouldn't look it up. That's how much he trusts they use their brains.
You don't need it. You do.
Well, it's a damn shame that you didn't substantiate this claim, Dennis. You're again projecting. I don't need religion. I'm perfectly fine accepting that I have this one life and one life only. I'm at peace with the fact that I'm not even a pawn in this cosmic game at play. It's you who needs religion, Dennis. You need it because it's the only thing that could possibly satiate your narcissism.
That's a big problem.
Yeah, it sure is, Dennis. Amen to that.
Happiness is a big deal.
If happiness is a big deal, and it is, how about cease demonizing your neighbors that don't believe in specific supernatural propositions? Is that so much to ask? I mean, Dennis has written a book about anti-Semitism, and so he's surely aware of the effects that unjust demonization has on groups. Yet what he does in his master's program, let alone all of his other content, is portray secularists as awfully as he can. He portrays people like me as fundamentally wicked. I'm not someone who earnestly disagrees with you. No, I'm actively trying to destroy society. But of course, by secularism, Dennis doesn't mean secularism. What he means is everything he doesn't like about modern society. He lumps all his dislikes together and then labels it secularism. It's no different to what he and others do with woke, liberal, or even leftists. It's cringe, but it's also incredibly sad. It rips families apart. It rips communities apart. It's entirely toxic, and it's just not needed. When theists condescendingly show no understanding, nor any attempt to understand their loved ones, and instead throw them out of their houses and disown them from their communities, the likes of Dennis are most certainly culpable. This is why it's important to address his rhetoric and his abuse of studies and statistics. It matters. It matters to the non-religious that are ostracized by their religious communities and families. And it matters to religious communities and families too. Because if they were presented with actual facts, as opposed to Dennis's one-dimensional fear-mongering, then they might still have their relationships intact with their non-religious friends and family, because they won't see them as if they're demons trying to destroy society. Anyhow, if you've enjoyed this series, and more broadly our content as of late, then you'll be pleased to hear that we've got huge plans to provide you with a whole load more. The only thing holding us back is fuel in the engine. Truth be told, we could do with a few more patrons, as we're currently a team of 3 and have found a lot of our content failing to bring in the ad revenue that it once did, due to us tackling more controversial topics. So, if you're willing and able, please consider buying us a round of coffee. On this note, we'd like to again thank and promote Ground News. Be sure to click the link in the description. Until next time, my fellow apes. Until next time.